Does request hosts? Yeah, got it.
There we go. Okay, can everybody see these slides? All right,
All set.
cool. So this is a series of slides that we have at FERCOG to give context to kind of what housing looks like in Franklin County. We did a housing study, a regional housing plan last year, and identified three major housing goals to preserve the existing housing in Franklin County, to preserve the existing affordability of housing, and to create new housing. And one of the funky things about housing in Franklin County is that our households are increasing, but our overall population is declining. And that's for a variety of reasons. A lot of it has to do with the different demographics that we have. So, 10 years ago, you had a family of four living in a single family home, like the one that I live in, that has 3 bedrooms. And then people grow older. So those two children, one of them moves out of town, one of them gets their own apartment, and now you have two empty nesters in a 3 bedroom house. And we're seeing this in all different age demographics. You've got, you know, older adults who are living alone or just with a spouse. You've got a single person living in a larger apartment than maybe they need. And we have a lot of larger, older housing stock that makes it difficult to adapt, especially for accessibility concerns. There's also a shortage of affordable housing units. And I think Monica and Lily will be talking more about what affordability actually means, because it can mean a lot of different things to different people. But overwhelmingly, it's just hard to afford housing. I think anyone who's existing in the world right now knows that and has heard, either you've had your own concerns or you've heard people around you share that concern. And we also have extremely low vacancy rates in Franklin County, which you need some vacancy to have slack in the market so that when people are ready to move, you're moving out of one unit, you need a new housing unit to move into. So a vacancy rate allows some of that kind of movement. And without that, it makes it very difficult to find a new place to live. And housing is increasingly out of reach for a typical local household. We're seeing a growing gap between the price of housing and how much income a household has to be able to afford housing. And we're going to talk more tonight about kind of different things that we can do to allow for more housing. And that was a very short and sweet version of this. There's an entire plan online on our website that I can put the link in the chat that goes into a lot of detail about different statistics about housing in our area. But I'm going to let Lily and Monica take over from here.
Thank you, Mariah, and thank you so much for that additional context. I'm going to start sharing my screen so if folks can confirm that they can see the presentation and not anything that they're not supposed to see that's on my many tabs open right now. Does that look good for folks?
Looks good.
Yes.
Great. Thank you again so much. So yes, again, my name is Monica Keel. I am Program Manager of the Municipal Engagement Initiative, and we're so happy to be here virtually with you all to do our Affordable Housing 101 session. This is a workshop that we offer virtually quarterly, but because of this direct relationship we have with the FERCOG in this contract, we're able to do this specifically for you all in Franklin County. But if you know someone who was not able to join today who would like to join in the future, you can feel free to send them to our CHAPA events webpage, and you can see when our next Affordable Housing 101 workshop will be available because they are all virtual and free sessions open to anyone. So a little bit about CHAPA. What does CHAPA do? So again, CHAPA stands for Citizens Housing and Planning Association. Our mission is to encourage the production and preservation of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income families and individuals. and to foster diverse and sustainable communities through planning and community development. Every person in Massachusetts should have a safe, healthy, and affordable place to call home. And we achieve this at CHAPA by advocating for opportunity, expanding access to housing, and developing the field through workshops such as our Affordable Housing 101 and the other workshops that we offer at CHAPA. So what are we doing here tonight? This session is an introduction to the basics of affordable housing. We will not be able to help any individuals who are in search of affordable housing for themselves or their families, but you can feel free to reach out to your local Housing Consumer Education Center or use a site like Housing Navigator or My Mass Home to help with housing search, to look at any kind of home ownership courses, financial assistance, any kind of information or resources can be found on those sites. And we're happy to share those links in the chat or in a follow-up email along with the slides. So for today's session, we'll be going over what is affordable housing? What does that really mean? Who lives in it? Who lives in affordable housing? How is it funded, built, supported, and preserved? Because as we saw, we need to build more housing, but we also need to preserve the affordability that we have and preserve the housing that we have. What strategies are cities and towns using to increase their housing supply? And what opportunities are there for impact? And we will be pausing around halfway through the presentation for questions, so just be aware of that. So why do we need more affordable housing? Housing is not just an address. It determines where we live determines nearly every aspect of our lives, where we work, where our kids go to school, the safety of our environment, our mental health, so much more. When people of all income levels, races, and backgrounds can live together, our communities thrive. In Massachusetts, nearly 1 out of 2 renters and 1 out of 3 homeowners cannot afford their current housing costs, leaving them at risk of eviction or foreclosure. And many households forego other basic needs in order to stay housed, to keep a roof over their head for themselves or their families. In order to meet the needs of our residents, Massachusetts needs 222,000 more homes by 2035. So within the next 10 years, we need 222,000 more homes across the entire Commonwealth. And of course, within that, some of those need to be affordable. So we wanted to share this chart, which is courtesy of Massachusetts Housing Partnership, to just show the annual housing production in Massachusetts by the decades. So this graph is starting in 1960s, going into 2010s. As you can see, as we're coming in to the late of the 20th century into the early 21st century, the housing production in Massachusetts has decreased. And in fact, most of the housing production that we're seeing now is single family. As we're getting closer into the 2020s, it evens out a little bit more. But as you see with the 90s and 2000s, a lot of the construction was in fact single family homes. And we have not built enough housing to keep up with the demand, nor the new challenges and needs of folks as they're advancing through life and their housing needs change as they go through the life cycle of housing. Our current situation in housing needs a multifold solution, but at the bare minimum, we need more construction in order to get those other pieces of the pie to fix all of the things that are going on in our current housing climate. So why are we so far behind in terms of production? So there was a study conducted out of BU by David Glick, Catherine Einstein, and Maxwell Palmer called the Neighborhood Defenders. It was a participatory politics and American housing crisis. So these researchers observed and reviewed thousands of hours of public meetings and examined who was making comments at those meetings on housing projects. Compared with the general population, they found that commenters were disproportionately white, male, older, and homeowners, and they showed up overwhelmingly to oppose new housing developments. These comments have successfully stopped the creation of thousands of homes for Massachusetts residents. Additionally, resistance from high-income neighbors pushes development into less affluent communities, leading to gentrification and displacement, and even further marginalization. And the disparities uncovered in the neighborhood defenders research are the legacy of nearly a century of discriminatory housing policy. Many of the housing conditions we take for granted and assume were accidental or just happen are actually the result of decades of discriminatory housing policies at the federal, state, and local level. All of this has led to a housing system that is inequitable. As these policies and programs were created by design, so too must our remedies to undo them, and we need to be intentional about those. There are 6 main pillars of housing discrimination that have been found by researchers. The first is mortgage lending and redlining. There's exclusionary zoning, restrictive covenants, discriminatory real estate practices, urban renewal and highway construction, and violence. If you want to learn more about these 6 pillars, another one of the workshops that we offer at CHAPA, again, this is offered quarterly on a free and virtual basis, is our Confronting the History of Housing Discrimination workshop that we do in conjunction with JALSA, the Jewish Alliance of Law and Social Action. We will share the link for the next session coming up because we have one coming up very soon. So if you want to hear more about these topics, to dive deeper past today, this is an easy other workshop for you to learn even more about how we got to where we are in terms of the housing situation. And thank you for sharing those links in the chat. So with all of that background is what really influenced the creation of the program that Lily and I work for, the Municipal Engagement Initiative. So as you probably all know, and as I've said previously, local support really can make or break new housing development, yet many communities in Massachusetts lack a strong pro-housing advocacy group. Founded in 2018, MEI, or the Municipal Engagement Initiative, works with residents on the ground to change the conversation and support existing local efforts in favor of more affordable housing. As you all know, and especially in Franklin County, each city or town has its unique challenges, so we focus on bringing together big tent coalitions to support affordable housing production. And this is some of the people that are included in this big tent coalition model. But of course, this is not an exhaustive list. We hope that you see yourself in this list. We hope that everybody sees themselves in this list because we want anyone, as the bottom line says, we want anyone who believes that all people deserve safe, affordable, and accessible housing. So this can be municipal staff, renters, homeowners, residents, and also keeping in mind folks that may have been recently displaced because they still know the community that they come from very well. So keeping them in the conversation is really important. And that's where our MEI team really focuses on those big tent coalitions, but we also help existing groups. I can say with my work at CHAPA, I had worked with the Franklin County Community Land Trust for a couple of years, which was really great work. They're a really great group that's now expanded to 3 counties of work. So I learned a lot working with them. So again, it's that big tent coalition, but also just working with other pro-housing groups to making sure that all of these people that we see on the screen are involved in these conversations, bringing in as many diverse voices as possible. So now we're going to get into more of the what is affordable housing. We're getting into the Affordable Housing 101 portion. And folks can feel free to pause me if I'm going too fast or if any other questions pop up. So what is affordable housing? Housing is considered affordable, and the quotes are there for a reason, because sometimes affordable does not actually, sometimes what they say is affordable does not actually feel what is affordable to us as people. Housing is considered affordable, and that is a lowercase a, when associated costs are 30% or less of a household's pre-tax income. And these housing costs include rent, mortgage, tax, insurance, utilities, etc. We'll dive deeper into that in the next slide. But some affordable housing occurs naturally. For example, a landlord may choose to maintain lower rents. We call this lowercase a affordable. When we talk about uppercase A affordable housing, we're usually talking about those deed-restricted affordable housing units. This is reserved for income-eligible households and is regulated and monitored to ensure compliance. So again, talking about those housing costs. And you might have heard this term before too. Does it mean to be cost burdened by those housing costs? Households paying more than 30% of their income towards housing are considered cost burdened, while households paying more than 50% of their income towards housing are considered severely cost burdened. What is included under housing costs? For renters, housing costs generally include rent plus estimated utilities. For homeowners, those generally include mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, and estimated utilities. So as you can see, if folks are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, they are cost burdened, which is why the affordable housing, when it is actually subsidized, folks have to pay 30 to 40% of their income towards housing so that they are not cost burdened. And how is eligibility even determined for who gets to live in these affordable housing homes? The Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD as it's commonly known, determines area median income. AMI is what a lot of people like to call it for short. This data is used to assess who is eligible for deed restricted housing. Generally, households need to earn 80% of the AMI or less to be eligible. Some programs explicitly target lower income households and others serve households at higher income, so it can determine the different payment standard. So the current area median income for a four-person household, so this is 100% of the area median income in Franklin County, is $104,400. So if a person is making 80% of that, they are eligible for affordable housing. And you've probably heard this term a lot too about what is public housing. And sometimes people like to confuse affordable housing and public housing, but they're not always the same thing. Local housing authorities provide publicly funded and managed affordable housing for income eligible households, and these households can include older residents, families, and people with disabilities. And again, not all affordable housing is public housing. Now, what is a housing voucher? Housing vouchers are awarded to income eligible households to subsidize those monthly housing costs. As I said before, tenants receiving a voucher generally pay 30 to 40% of their income towards housing, and the balance is covered by a housing authority or a subsidized agency. Sometimes folks are allowed to pay a little bit more of their income towards housing if they receive a reasonable accommodation to do so. There are both federal and state funded vouchers, which one of the most being Section 8 or the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is a federal program, but we also have state vouchers such as MRVP, the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program. And under fair housing laws in Massachusetts, a landlord cannot discriminate against someone for having a voucher. So a landlord cannot say, we do not accept Section 8 voucher holders here. That would be considered discrimination based on source of income. So what is a mobile voucher versus a project-based voucher? A project-based rental assistant places a rent subsidy on the unit, on the home in a specific housing development that may be rented at a rate that is affordable to eligible households. So if a person moves in, that unit is affordable. When the person moves out, the affordability stays in the unit. A mobile housing voucher stays with the voucher holder and can be used in any unit that falls under the fair market rent that is set by HUD. So if you have a mobile voucher, it comes with you. You can move it wherever you move to. So again, when a household moves out, they lose the subsidy and the new renter with the household gets it for a project-based voucher. And what is the difference between rent based on income and fixed below market rent? So this graph is based on a graph that was made by one of our partners, Housing Navigator. Again, a really great housing search engine for folks to use if they are in need of looking for housing for themselves. So what is the rent? So rent based on income, again, it's 30% of your household income. It adjusts if your income goes up or down when you recertify. And examples of that types of housing are public housing or voucher holders, or if it is a project-based voucher. Fixed below market rent is a little different. So that's 30% of income based on that overall area median income. So it's adjusted based on the changes of the area median income, which does happen annually, and it's not with the change of the individual in the household. So it does not change if the homeowner's income goes up or goes down. It's based on the area median income. And some examples of that types of housing can be 40B developments, LIHTC, which is a low interest housing tax credit developments, or inclusionary zoning units. And we'll be digging deeper into those later on in the presentation as well. So with that, we're going to pause for questions because I see things are happening in the chat.
So far, I think it's all just me dropping links, but
Okay, just
now's a
making
good
sure.
time if anyone has a question. Yeah, I see Lee.
I have a question sort of based more on the introduction. When you were talking about how many, like hundreds of thousands of housing units that we came up with, and do any of these resources provide support services for co-housing? People that just want, like all of those big, people that are overhoused and they have extra space. Are there support services to help people have tenants in their house?
To kind of help facilitate just like the logistics
Yeah,
of finding-
leases. Yeah, like
Yeah,
it's sort of like a renter assistant for co-housing.
yeah.
So I know that LifePath previously had a program that was a pilot project where they were matching older adults with renters based off of a similar program in Vermont. And I believe that that program has ended, and I don't think there's been any kind of replacement program in our area at least. But Lily and Monica, I don't know if you know of any other kind of similar programs or resources out there.
I do not, unfortunately. I do think that's an amazing and like innovative solution that I feel like is kind of starting to gain a little bit more traction, but I would not say that it has become commonplace enough that there's like a lot of infrastructure and funding and support to encourage it. But yeah, I'm very intergenerational housing, co-housing. I think all of those are very ripe opportunities that don't necessarily require any construction and is really more about using just kind of the sharing economy, as some might call it, or using the resources that we already have a little bit more effectively and efficiently.
Lynn?
So I have a 4-bedroom house and I rent out bedrooms. I know in the past tenants have used raft.
Yeah.
To help pay for the rent, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good to hear that as a question, Lee, because as VRCOG is thinking about what other grants we're applying for in the coming year and what resources people need, things like resources for people who aren't typically considering themselves landlords but might be wanting to rent out an accessory dwelling unit or rooms in their house are something that's been on kind of my accumulating list of potential resources that we could make. So it's helpful to know if those things are needed in the community and kind of what information people are looking for.
Yeah. I would also just mention that AARP has been doing some really amazing work around livable communities and creating really accessible, like beautiful visual, like programs and trainings and documents that cover kind of some solutions like this. I don't know if they specifically have one about co-housing, but I think it'd be worth looking into. And maybe if they don't have something yet, we could encourage them to create something like that. But yeah, they have a bunch of stuff on like age-friendly housing and ADUs and all kind remodeling to make homes more accessible. It's like all kinds of stuff, but definitely recommend that resource as well. All right. Any other questions on Monica's section? All right. my turn. So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Lily Link. I'm the Director of Municipal Engagement at CHAPA, and I will be taking over for the next section. Oh, that's funny. I had it pulled up to the right slide and then it wanted to bring me back to the beginning, but I won't make you listen to it all again. So I'm just going to catch up. All right. So now we're going to move into kind of doing a high level overview of some of the policies and programs that currently exist to encourage the production of affordable housing. So first is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, otherwise known as LIHTC. This is a federal government program that provides state and local agencies with tax credits for developers to acquire, rehabilitate, or construct rental housing that is targeted to lower income households. So this tax credit enables developers to raise capital for the construction of housing for low income folks. And under the federal income tax code, investors in low income rental housing are permitted to take a credit against taxes owed to the federal government. So both for-profit and nonprofit developers can qualify for this credit. It's a pretty popular program. If you do want to utilize LIHTC, either 20% of the units need to be reserved for people with incomes at or below 50% of the area median income, or at least 40% of the units must be affordable for people with incomes at or below 60% of area median income. And I think it's worth noting that a lot of affordability programs are targeting folks more in that 80% of area median income level. There are not quite as many that are targeting folks at that 30%, 50%, 60%. So this is a really critical one for those lower affordability levels. And the project has to be retained as low income housing for at least 30 years. But not forever, which does raise a whole other challenge of when that 30 years expires, you often have to kind of go to bat for that affordable housing again. Chapter 40B is often in Massachusetts used as a proxy term for all affordable housing, but this is not accurate. It is one specific program. This is a state program here in Massachusetts that was passed almost 60 years ago now. And this law allows developments to override certain local zoning codes. I will say it's not a complete free-for-all. It's not like all the rules go away, but to override certain parts of the zoning, oftentimes things like density, height, kind of the massing of the building, as long as 20 to 25% of the units are deed restricted affordable. So the idea is that in exchange for building these affordable units, the town will kind of ease up on some of that bureaucratic red tape that developers might otherwise have to go through. Oftentimes they build at higher densities than would typically be allowed by that zoning. When a community has met the minimum of 10% of its total housing units listed on the state subsidized housing inventory, they are no longer subject to Chapter 40B. So at that point, this is really intended for communities that are not building affordable housing. And it's meant to give developers a little bit of an easier path to get that housing in there. Once they do reach 10%, 40B is no longer applicable to them. But I think it's also, that is a threshold that was created for the sake of the law. But I think we can safely say that in many communities, having 10% of your units be affordable doesn't mean you've actually met your housing needs. Also, I think it's worth noting that when a development is added to the subsidized housing inventory, all of the units count, including the market rate units. So if you have a building with 100 units and only 20 of them are affordable, all 100 will count towards the subsidized housing inventory. Why? I don't know. I was not alive when this law was written, but it just kind of further demonstrates that that 10% is not a number we should, throw our hands up and say we did it, because it certainly is not going to fill the entire gap. But I will say, despite those caveats, that 40B has been incredibly effective over the last 60 years. And frankly, the majority of the affordable housing that's been produced in that timeline was produced because of 40B. The Community Preservation Act is a law that individual communities can opt into. About 200 communities have already adopted the Community Preservation Act in Massachusetts, so that's not quite 2/3. And the CPA helps communities preserve open space, historic preservation, and affordable housing by placing a surcharge on property taxes. So this surcharge can range anywhere from 0.5% to 3%. And municipalities can exempt low and moderate income households and or commercial properties from this surcharge. The revenue that is raised goes into a local community preservation trust fund, and then there's typically, a committee that is determining how it gets spent. And the state provides matching funds from its own community preservation trust fund, which is a big incentive for communities to pass it. Of those three categories, open space, historic preservation, and affordable housing, the community has to allocate at least 10% of the funds to each category. So at a bare minimum, you would have to put 10% towards housing. The remaining 70% can be allocated however you see fit. In some communities, I will say they definitely emphasize the open space and historic preservation part. However, you could theoretically have 80% of your CPA go towards affordable housing and then 10% each to open space and historic preservation. So there is a lot of room for each individual community to utilize this program however they see fit. In the time since CPA was communities have been sort of gradually passing this over the last 25, 30 years. Over $3.4 billion has been raised. And that's going towards things like building affordable housing, creating new parks. You may have even seen in your town little signs say like brought to you by the Community Preservation Act. So you can see here on this map that a few, will it let me zoom in? Oh yeah, it will. So it looks like Conway, Deerfield, Shelburne, Leverett, Whately, quite a few towns in Franklin County have passed the Community Preservation Act, but we've still got a few folks around here on the edges to go. I should say this is as of November 2024. It's possible one or two have snuck in there, but this should be pretty up to date. An affordable housing trust fund is another local program. A local housing trust enables municipalities to collect funds for affordable housing separately from the municipal budget and to use those funds for local initiatives to create and preserve affordable housing. So examples of what a local affordable housing trust can do include providing financial support for the construction of affordable homes by private developers, nonprofit or for-profit. This actually just happened in my neighborhood. There's a pretty large mixed-use development that is going to be 50% affordable, which is really exciting at really low AMIs. And the developers were having trouble. There was like a couple $1 million gap in their funding. And the project was sort of like on the line because of this. And so they went to our affordable housing trust and said, will you fill in this gap for us? They voted yes. And so that enabled the project to move forward. They can rehabilitate existing homes to convert them to affordable housing, increasing affordability levels in new housing development projects by maybe incentivizing developers to make more of them affordable, developing surplus municipal land or buildings, preserving properties faced with expiring affordability restrictions. I referenced earlier, a lot of these programs expire after 30 years. That tends to be the golden number, 30 for some reason. And I guess it's a little over one generation, but they can help preserve those or support rent assistance for low and moderate income households. So the go-to folks, if you want to really dig into affordable housing trusts, are the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. They have some really great resources, and Shelley Gehring, who works at MHP, is sort of my go-to person for all questions affordable housing trust. You can see here that affordable housing trusts and the Community Preservation Act often work together to fund projects. So not all communities that have an affordable housing trust have CPA, but about 73% do. And there are a variety of ways that you can fund your affordable housing trust. So Community Preservation Act is one of them. It could be fees you negotiate with a developer and some sort of community benefits agreement. You could pass a special bylaw or ordinance that might fund it. Tax title sales, inclusionary zoning, which is what that IZ in the middle means. I'll get to what that is in a second. General funds. There's a lot of different ways that you can fund that affordable housing trust. And then there is an appointed, typically board, that decides how those funds get distributed. The next program is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So this is a program that enables the transfer of property ownership into the hands of tenants and or affordable housing developers by enabling tenants to exercise a first right of purchase. So landlords are required to give notice to tenants and then allow a specified amount of time for tenants to express interest, make an offer, and secure funding. Some programs also enable a local nonprofit to be designated as an agent. So if the tenants cannot purchase the units themselves, the nonprofit is given a chance to purchase it. So it could be a community development corporation, it could be a community land trust, but it kind of, it puts the brakes on a little bit and gives people a chance to really prevent their own displacement. So this is not currently the law of the land yet. Because we live in a very fun home rule petition state, this is not something that municipalities can opt into on their own. So Somerville and Boston, and I believe a few others, have submitted home rule petitions to the state in order to be able to enact this at the local level. Yeah, it's a fun system that we work in, that we there's a lot of stuff we cannot do independently at the local level, TOPA included. But I will say this has been implemented in other cities with great success, and that's sort of why folks in Massachusetts are trying to get that going here. Community land trusts, I mentioned, are one of the entities that may often utilize that tenant opportunity to purchase to acquire the land. So Community Land Trust, otherwise known as a CLT, is a nonprofit organization. In Franklin County, you have a regional land trust, which is super exciting, kind of a new initiative that's still getting going. And this organization owns and stewards land, which is commonly used for housing, but can also be used for farming, retail, open space, any other use that fits the mission. But the idea is to provide long-term access to land for folks at all income levels and to move properties from the speculative market into community control. So the CLT owns the land and leases it for use. The homes on top of the land are sold to income eligible households, so you would need to be below a certain area median income. But when they buy it, they're buying the home, not the land beneath it. So they're actually leasing the land and buying the home. And this enables the home to be much more affordable because, as anyone who owns a home knows, the value of your home overall is sort of split between the value of the building itself and the value of the land. And so they're able to decrease the cost of purchasing the home. And the ground lease states that the home must be resold to another income eligible person, which ensures that the home will remain affordable in perpetuity. So this is not an effective method for supporting wealth generation through home ownership for folks who are looking to buy a home and use that to build wealth for them and their families. This is not the best solution. It's intended to keep affordable homes available forever. But someone could buy that home and live there for the rest of their life if wealth generation is not their primary goal, and maintain a home that is affordable for them. So it's an excellent solution in terms of being able to ensure long-term affordability. Did I skip something? No. Okay. One term that you might come across as you dig into your housing research is the idea of missing middle housing. And this is the type of housing, Monica showed you at the beginning that chart of the single family and multifamily homes and how that production has declined. But what we've really stopped building are modest, gentle density housing options intended for people who are not eligible for income restricted affordable housing, but who cannot afford current market rate prices. So these are folks who don't have the money to buy a large single family home, but also wouldn't qualify for one of those affordable units in a 40B. These are the folks that really find themselves kind of stuck because we largely have not been building things like triple deckers, townhomes, duplexes, cottage court style developments where multiple small individual buildings share one large parcel. And these are a great kind of, like I said, modest, not super high density, but not a large single family home on a large lot, more accessible to like a young working person, someone trying to get their foot in the door of home ownership. And this is really the kinds of housing that we want to see more of. And so one of the most effective things we can do for encouraging a greater variety and a greater diversity of housing is to put zoning into place that allows and even encourages that specific type of development. So you may have heard last year, Governor Healy and the state legislature passed the Affordable Homes Act, which is pretty historic legislation that provides $5.1 billion in capital funding authorization and a wide range of housing policies to support the creation and preservation of tens of thousands of homes. So this is the biggest investment in housing in our state's history. It includes significant increases in funding authorizations for things like state public housing, affordable housing trusts, the Housing Innovations Fund, the Housing Stabilization Fund, the Commonwealth Builder Program, green housing, and housing choice infrastructure. Additionally, on top of all that funding, it created and expanded tax credit programs that will help spur much needed production, which includes the Community Reinvestment Program, homeownership production, and historic rehabilitation tax credits. It also includes policies such as the creation of the Office of Fair Housing and the Fair Housing Trust Fund, which mandates the establishment of a statewide housing plan. It allows for accessory dwelling units by right in single-family zoned districts all across the state. It established a special commissions on extremely low-income housing, senior housing, and accessible housing for people living with disabilities. It created a supportive housing pool fund to address the needs of households experiencing homelessness, and established eviction record ceiling and authorized a social housing pilot. So lots and lots of stuff packed into this bill. If you want to kind of get more of a breakdown, I encourage you to go to our website and you can learn all about it or speak with our policy director, Matt Noyes. It was lots of these things are now we're in the midst of implementing them. So it's a great time to get involved. One of the things I mentioned are accessory dwelling units, which are small residences that share a lot with a primary residence, which is typically a single family home. And they can take many forms. They can be detached, attached, interior on the upper level, like an attic unit, interior on the lower level, like a basement unit, above the garage, a garage conversion. And ADUs are a really excellent housing solution, I think, in a lot of communities because they're in single family dominant communities that have anxiety around larger buildings or greater density. An ADU is a great way to kind of sneak in a home for someone in a way that isn't necessarily going to change the impression of the home from the street. There's many different ways to attach it to the building. You'd never even know there was another home in there. Or if you want to do it detached, you can do it in the backyard. You might not even see it from the street. So they tend to be kind of a little bit more digestible for people who have concerns about new housing. And they're great options, particularly for, older adults who are looking to downsize, multi-generational households, young couples without children, single adults, in-home caretakers, if homeowners want to seek additional income. And I mentioned AARP. You can also see this graphic that I have is from a booklet they made called the ABCs of ADUs, which I highly recommend. It is an amazing breakdown of accessory dwelling units, and it tells a lot of stories of the ways in which people have utilized these to improve their lives. Very common uses are, if you have an aging adult, they might want to move into an ADU and have their adult child and their grandchildren move into the main house. And that gives the older adult the opportunity to live in a single story unit that's maybe the size is a little bit kind of more manageable for them, but to stay on the property that they know and love and the community that they know and love. And then give the adult child and the grandchildren an opportunity to live in a home where maybe before they were renting an apartment or they weren't able to get their foot in the door of home ownership. Or have the older adult stay in the main house and have an in-home caretaker live in the ADU. There's so many different ways that you can utilize them, and there are also ways to protect against things like short-term rentals, which I know are a concern for folks, particularly on the Cape and in the Berkshires. So there are ways to ensure that these ADUs are being utilized for actual year-round housing. And you can write that into your bylaw that is permitted based off of the state law, because they want to see this be used for real housing. Another thing I mentioned that was created by the Affordable Homes Act is the Office of Fair Housing, which CHAPA played a big role in advocating for. And we're actually very proud to share that the former director of municipal engagement, the woman who held this role before me, the reason I have this job is because she was poached to go and run the Office of Fair Housing. So thanks for that, state. It's a good opportunity for Whitney, and it obviously is a good opportunity for me as well. We're very sad to see her go, but it is good to know that this brand new office, first of its kind, is being run by one of the state's premier fair housing experts, Whitney Demetrius. And so it's in very good hands. But the responsibilities of the office include collaborating with state agencies and municipalities to eliminate housing discrimination, overcome patterns of segregation, foster inclusive communities without barriers that restrict access, and support the enforcement of and compliance with fair housing laws. Because there is still a lot of housing discrimination out there, both intentional and unintentional. Sometimes people don't even necessarily know that what they're doing is considered discriminatory. Like they might not know that you can't deny renting to a family with children just because you don't want to pay for the lead remediation. Monica mentioned at the beginning, you can't deny someone just because they have a housing voucher. And so oftentimes a lot of tenants don't necessarily know their rights either. So it's really important that we make sure that, realtors, mortgage lenders, landlords, and the tenants themselves have an understanding of what their rights and responsibilities are, because there's still a lot more education that can be done on that topic. So this office will also develop fair housing initiatives, including but not limited to equal access to fair housing, access and proximity to multimodal transportation. So, is it possible to get around without requiring a car? Are there trains, buses, bike lanes, etc.? Air, water, and land usage and quality. Something that we'll talk a little bit about at Confronting the History of Housing Discrimination, if you're able to join us next week, is the history of not just segregating people by race, but also concentrating lower income people and oftentimes people of color in areas close to industrial uses. So it's not only are we segregating people, we are also putting low income people often in very hazardous environments that are just not safe for housing. Access to healthcare, access to and quality of education, language access, and they will also administer the Fair Housing Fund and prepare an annual report on how they are doing. So the last piece, I know we both threw a lot of terminology at you, a lot of different programs that exist out there. But what's most important is what you all can do to get involved. So the community has, input and impact in a variety of kind of steps in the process. First, municipalities are often undergoing kind of long-term planning processes, whether it's a housing needs assessment, a housing production plan, a master plan, rezoning, oftentimes like maybe totally redoing the zoning code or redoing the zoning in a particular neighborhood. And typically, these processes take quite a long time and do involve a fair amount of community input. So that's an opportunity. Being involved in those conversations is an opportunity to really be thinking about that long range planning. Where do we want to be 5, 10, 20 years from now? What are our goals as a community? So there's that ongoing planning. Then there are, the opportunity to discuss more specific projects, like this affordable housing development is before the planning board, and they'll either approve this zoning change or not, or approve, whatever it is that might be up for discussion. So there's that big picture planning you can be involved in. There's the specific projects, whether it's something that's been proposed by a nonprofit or for-profit developer, or sites that maybe have been identified by the municipality, whether it's, municipally owned sites that they're looking to dispose of. We're seeing a lot of communities selling underutilized municipal parking lots to developers. So residents, you have your eyes on the ground. You see what's getting used, you see what's not getting used. That's information that can be brought to the town. And then of course, whenever and wherever possible, using your voice to speak up in support of new housing. So how you can start is first, it's always helpful to dig a little bit into the local housing data. Obviously, FERCOG is an amazing resource for that. We also love to use DataTown, which was developed by the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, where you can, if Monica's able to drop the link in the chat, you can look up all the, how many people in your town are struggling to pay their rent or their mortgage? How has school enrollment changed in the last 25 years? All kinds of things, like what's the average commute time, and what are our municipal finances, and how much housing have we built in the last 20 years, etc. So, obviously you're all here tonight because you want to educate yourself on this topic. The more information you have, the more confident you can be in your advocacy. But I also want to say that you don't need to be a technical expert on every aspect of housing in order to be an effective advocate. What's most important is your perspective, your experience, and your story as a resident, and as a human being. So information is great. Information is empowering. It never hurts to have more knowledge. However, I don't want to give the impression that you can't be a housing advocate unless you go and do hours and hours of research. What's most important is your willingness to just show up and use your voice. And the planning board's not going to be like, oh, she didn't cite any academic resources there. I don't think that we should listen to her opinion. Trust me, the people showing up to say they don't like housing are not doing their research, or they claim they are, but it's Facebook. Attending meetings early and as often as you can to speak up for more homes. The places where you're gonna see these discussions happening are obviously the planning board, first and foremost, select board, if you have a zoning board of appeals, oftentimes the historic preservation committee, or even the conservation committee. But I would say particularly planning board and zoning board of appeals are where the action's happening. Or if you have a city council, that is where you're going to see housing projects actually come up for a vote, or policies that would impact the future potential of housing. Talking directly with local officials, sometimes planners will have like coffee with a planner, office hours with a planner, going to those to share your perspective emailing them directly. If you're unable to actually make it to a meeting, you can always submit public comment via email. Talking to your neighbors. And it doesn't have to, and in fact, I would encourage you to not necessarily come in ablazing, like, here's all the reasons you should support housing, but just kind of maybe starting to have a little curiosity about them and their perspectives. Just sort of kind of opening up that area of conversation. It could be, maybe there's a specific project that's being discussed and you could say, have you heard about this? What's your perspective on it? Maybe if there's someone who's been in town for a long time, demonstrating some curiosity about that and about their lived experience. Just finding opportunities to kind of make those connections in a low stakes environment, so that then when the time comes where maybe you do have to have a kind of a real conversation about housing that maybe does get a little bit more political, that base of like trust has already been established. So you're not just like coming out of the blue talking about zoning with them. Writing op-eds and letters to the editor where possible. I know that the death of local media has been devastating for a lot of reasons, but it definitely makes it a little bit harder to get the word out to people in ways that aren't just Facebook, which anyone who's been on a Facebook community page knows that it's where information goes to die. It's mostly the ranting corner. But when and where possible and applicable, starting postcard or social media campaigns, if there's a specific, project you want to see passed or a specific policy that you're hoping to see passed, speaking to your state representatives about, implementing policies and funding at the state level to encourage the production and preservation of affordable housing. And then when and where possible, joining a local housing coalition. The bulk of what Monica and I do is working directly with residents to support their coalitions and their pro-housing efforts. We've done it in dozens and dozens of towns all across the state, from the Berkshires to the Cape, from Greater Newburyport to Braintree to Worcester to Medford and everything in between. So we're always happy to also just share what we've learned working in communities at a lot of different scales, about how people can come together and make housing happen. So if you want to continue that conversation, Monica has weekly office hours, so you can go directly through that link to schedule those with her, or if the times that her office hours take place don't work for you, you can also schedule a meeting outside of that by emailing her. Monica also mentioned the Confronting the History of Housing Discrimination webinar that we have coming up next week on May 5th. And you can go to chapa.org/events to see any other kind of informational sessions and things that we have coming up. So with that, I will close and I will check. I can see some chat action.
I think it's mostly Monica and Andrea and I putting things in there.
No problem. Oh, cool. And you guys have a CPA housing workshop. That's great.
Yeah, so we have the CPA housing workshop coming up. So if you're in a CPA community and you want to learn more about what you can do with the money and to support housing, I recommend signing up. If you're not in a CPA community and you want to learn more about how CPA funds can be used for housing so you can better advocate for your community to adopt it, you're also welcome to attend. And if any of you have questions about any of the things that we talked about, definitely feel free to reach out. Obviously, Monica has the office hours that we just talked about where you can sign up for those, but also feel free to reach out to me. And if you're looking for certain resources, I'm happy to connect you to the things that we know of. Or if you're looking for information specifically on Franklin County or various things that are going on, I'm happy to fill you in what we know.
And can we have these slides?
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'll send out the slides to everyone who registered, and anyone who wants a recording, I can also send that out. I know there were some other people from, I think, Whately and Leverett who told me that they couldn't make it, who wanted them. So I'll make sure that I get those out. Lee, did you have a question?
Well, I really have a comment. I just wanted to add, at one point, Lily, you mentioned about not knowing why the affordable housing restrictions end after 30 years. And it's just, it just totally correlates with the statute that limits deed restrictions. Any kind of a deed restriction that's not a permanent restriction expires after 30 years. So it just follows that. But I liked your logic about being just a little over a generation.
Yeah, I know in a lot of communities, they had a, an amount of affordable housing and now they have zero. I know that when I worked in Irving, that was the case. They had half a dozen or so houses that had been affordable and those had expired and now they have 0% affordable housing. So it's definitely an issue. And like you said, Lily, having to advocate then for either those to be renewed or new units created.
And I should just add that, when they expire with deed restrictions, there is a mechanism. I mean, you can re-record it for 20 more years, but of course you would have to pay money for that. But it does, it's not like they absolutely expire after 30 years. They expire unless they're renewed.
Right. Yeah.
And excellent. What an excellent workshop. Thank you for going over so much. I was a little worried. This is exactly what's helpful to me. And I was a little worried when I was just looking at the brief information that this was going to be all about new housing development, but it really covered everything. So I just want to tell you, I think it's fantastic. And I look forward to having the recording and the slides. Nice job. And to next week's webinar.
Yes. Yes.
Me too. I'm gonna sign up right away.
That's great.
Yeah, next week will be led, I will be there, but it will be primarily led by Bob Van Meter, who is far, far more experienced than I am in all of these topics. He's been working in the housing world for many decades at Alston Brighton Community Development Corporation. He teaches about housing and is like one of the most dedicated advocates I know. He lives in Acton, and basically everything good happening in Acton when it comes to housing is thanks to Bob. So he's an amazing resource. We're very lucky that he has been just volunteering his time to do these with us. And there was one other thing. Oh, just to round out the conversation on the SHI and the 10% and all that. It just also, with units expiring, we need to be continually developing housing. Like, people can't say, well, we're over 10% at SHI, so we're done for life, because if you add more market, it's as a percentage of housing as a whole. So if you stop building affordable housing because you hit 10% and you keep building market rate housing, then now that affordable housing represents less than 10% of your overall housing stock. And then properties expire. And so it really does, while some would argue that once they hit 10%, they're done. They've done their job. The reality is it's a constantly moving target because more people are getting born.
People are moving around. I would also just add that, we see in Franklin County that a significant part of our housing stock was built pre-1940. And so if you're not continuously building and rehabbing, your housing stock is aging, and that comes with a lot of other issues like lead and asbestos and just generally being in disrepair. So there's a lot of reasons, even beyond affordability, to keep your housing stock moving. Lee, did you have another comment?
I had a question, but I forgot it. So
That's okay.
it's okay.
I was thinking that municipal vulnerability plans are another good way of furthering housing, to work with your towns to create a demand specifically through your plan.
Yeah. And I think too, a big part of our philosophy when it comes to the coalitions that we help to create and support is bringing in, the climate advocate folks, the transportation advocate folks, the racial justice, the arts and culture advocates, because for one thing, housing touches all of those, but also there are ways to leverage different programs and funding sources to be able to kind of do multiple things at one time. How can we leverage housing funding to meet our climate goals and vice versa? So yeah, definitely. I think that's part of why we encourage folks to not assume that only the existing housing advocates, thanks Montserrat, are worth reaching out to, you know, because sometimes it's just a matter of helping people recognize that the thing that they care about is actually very much tied to housing. And it's like, it's okay, you can still identify as like a climate person. That can be your main thing. That's great. We need people doing that. But also housing is relevant to that issue for XYZ reasons. So please come out to this meeting and
For
raise that
sure.
Yeah. I think another thing that I have just been thinking about a lot lately is that it's often truly one or two people who make the difference in the community. Like Lou, you were saying, of like, sometimes there's one or two dedicated people who are really loud in either direction or any direction. And it's what really drives that community. And so, you know, just speaking up and being a reliable commenter on things can be enough. And like you said, you don't have to know every single data point. You just got to keep sending an email or calling or showing up and saying, actually, I do want housing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it
Remembered
is
my
amazing.
question. It's a percentage question. Oh, go ahead, Lily.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say it's amazing how much just a few people can totally change the conversation, especially when they go first. That's one
Set the
tip.
tone.
Start, get to that mic first,
Yeah.
because all it
Like you're
takes is
in
like 2 or 3 NIMBYs in a row,
Yep.
and then everyone else is gonna go like, ooh, I don't want to get up now because now I'm afraid that I'm the only one. And you know, you can do just the opposite. If the first 2 or 3 people who speak are all in support, it
Yeah.
might be that the rest of the room all hates it. But we've already kind of established a norm that the pros are the supportive people have set the baseline. So yeah, get to
Yeah.
the mic. What were you
What
gonna
were
say?
you going to ask, Lee?
So my percentage question is related to, well, Athol I discovered has 5% affordable housing. And so I imagine when it's being counted, it's counting capital A affordable, right? Where there's deed restrictions.
Yes.
And it's just so interesting, I guess, that like it would be so interesting to see if it was possible to see both measures of the lower, the small a affordable percentage and the capital A affordable percentage. Because I'm just really curious, like when you drive around any town and you think, like I would just assume that there was a lot of affordable housing in Athol, but it's not, I mean, technically not. Yeah. So maybe one of those
I don't know if
data centers.
Athol has a housing plan or a housing production plan, but that kind of data might be in there if they've done that. We did it with Orange, and I was surprised, like, Orange is one of the few Franklin County communities that actually is above the 10%. But they definitely do not have enough housing for even their existing population at the affordable rate, the low A affordable rate. So
Andrea, in that plan that you're talking about in Orange, both figures are described or shown?
Well, it shows the number of capital A affordable units, and but it also has a lot of demographic information and shows sort of the percentages of homeowners and renters and how many of them are what income brackets they tend to be in, and then also what percentage are cost burdened by their housing. And despite Orange having more than Athol and more affordable housing than many communities in Franklin County, there's still a real need for more. But
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
doesn't
really.
mean they're being built.
Yeah, looking at rates of cost burden really is, I think, the best way I know to determine how much lowercase a of basically just like, can the people who are there afford what they're paying right now? So we can see in Athol that basically 57% of renters are cost burdened, and about a third of owners are cost burdened.
There was recently a Boston Globe article that talked about housing prices in relation to household income. And Athol was actually flagged as like one of the highest percentage increases in housing costs when compared to household income or personal income. I don't remember which one they were looking at, but like the gap got extraordinarily large in the span of like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'll actually look and see if I can find that article quickly because it was interesting. But I put a link to the housing plans page that has the orange housing plan. So if you want to take a look at that, Lee, that's in there.
Yeah, we have a new retail shopping mall, which has made Athol more attractive, the so-called Athol Commons or whatever it's called, North Quabbin Commons.
Yeah, and I
Market
think this
basket.
like this disconnect of like, okay, there's that little a affordable of like, what can people who actually live there actually afford? There's the capital A based off of the area median income, which is very imprecise because it covers it's not just specific to the town, it covers a whole region basically. You know, the greater Boston area median income goes from Boston all the way up to New Hampshire. Like within that range, you've got a lot of different communities. Like you've got places like Chelsea, but you've also got places like Andover, and the actual median income in each of those communities is not the same. But area median income just kind of lumps them all into one group. So when the capital A is being measured based off of area median income, which is an imprecise measurement, I think that is a big driver of, we hear a lot of people saying like, this affordable housing is not affordable. And in many cases it is true because the calculations are being, maybe in Andover, what's affordable is actually affordable. But if you take that exact same number and bring it to Chelsea or Lynn or Revere, that's not the case anymore. So I think it makes the whole thing a little bit more complex in terms of getting people on board, because I understand how people might feel like, well, this isn't even really solving the problem if they don't understand like how all these different programs work together and how things get measured. Because ultimately what matters is, can you afford your housing? And it doesn't matter to you where you fall on the AMI. You just care about, can I pay my rent every month? That's what people are looking at.
Yeah, I put a link to the Boston Globe article in the chat, but also this is a map from it that is the one I was thinking of, where Athol is actually flagged as single family home prices going up more than 90% in the last 5 years. And clearly Orange, Greenfield, and Montague are not far behind there.
Yeah.
So, we're seeing it, I think, in a lot of the cities in rural places in the more populated areas. Obviously Eastern Mass is seeing a lot of it, but I think we're not far behind.
Yeah.
It's funny that they don't have data for most of the other Franklin County towns,
Yeah.
but I think it's been similar. Although Orange, I feel like it's on the eastern end of the county, and so they are potentially the edge of people moving west trying to find affordable, little a affordable housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you look like that immediate greater Boston area, Cambridge, Somerville, Milton, Newton, those kinds of places are actually seeing less stark increases in this period than some of the other places. And I think part of that is offset by the fact that that's where the vast majority of the building has been happening is in those areas. So it's able to kind of absorb a little bit of that. But yeah, also the, you know, the pandemic drove a lot of people to move further out from city centers in search of more space, which was a big driver. But yeah, I mean, geez, I'm looking at the Athol one, 88% between 2019 and 2024. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm realizing, Andrea, so the reason that most of the Western Mass towns don't have data is because it's towns that have fewer than 50 transactions are excluded. So any small town isn't selling 50 houses a year, which I think
Yeah.
also goes to show that our housing stock is just very, very small.
Yeah, and the number of units during this time with high interest rates, like people aren't putting their homes on the market unless they absolutely have to.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Cambridge is the main town that is putting a lot of their CPA money into housing. That's the one I've heard of being the main one doing that. So
Which
Orange
town
is
was that, Jen? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Cambridge.
And
They
we
made
are, go ahead.
they just made a specific commitment to that. They put all their everything except for the 10% of historic and 10% of open space they put into housing. That's my understanding.
I was just going to add that FERCog is talking with some towns, specifically the ones that have housing trusts and CPA, but also just generally about if there's interest in creating a shared housing coordinator position. It had been brought up close to 10 years ago. And at the time there was interest, but not enough to make it happen. And that's been brought up again. So, you know, as we're all moving through the world, that's just something to keep in mind, is that if there's enough interest, and especially as more towns adopt CPA and they have funds to be able to put towards it, you know, they could choose to take it from their just general funds, but most towns don't have the capacity for that. So it would be interesting to see how that evolves in the coming years, since housing is such a big issue.
So can the towns use their CPA money to pay their share of the coordinator?
Yeah, so we're still figuring out, you know, which towns are interested and how the position could be set up, but very likely, at least to start, it would pay towards my time if there was just, you know, 1 or 2 towns interested, or if there were specific projects. But CPA dollars can only be used towards affordable housing. So it can't just be like if it was my time, I wouldn't be able to just work generally on housing production in a town. It would have to be specifically for affordable housing. So that is one tricky part, because a lot of times towns don't know what projects are going to be until they're already underway. So it's kind of a work in progress. But I think all of the towns would benefit from having some attention, especially when a project does come up and then there isn't staff support to kind of usher that project through. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Lily and Monica, for sharing everything you know. It's really great to have you all sharing knowledge with Western Mass and gathering knowledge from all of our folks out here.
Our pleasure. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks very much. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
for having us.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Have a nice evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, Mariah.
Yeah.
We do want to talk. I think I'd really like to get a meeting with you and Will, our CPA chair, Will Flanders, to start trying to aggressively think about how to promote housing in Shelburne. So
Yeah.
I'll talk to Will about it, but maybe we can set up some kind of a meeting like this.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool.
Great. Oh, and I have another thing I want to talk to you about.
This is so convenient.
It is. But one thing I'm really interested in promoting in Franklin County is wastewater energy recovery.
Ooh.
Are you familiar with that? I've been,
Conceptually, nothing more than I know that it's a thing you can do.
it's a thing you can do. Yeah. And I'd love to talk to you more about that, but I don't have to right now. So
I mean, if you want to right now, I'm happy to. I'm already here. But if you would like to go eat dinner or something, that's fine too.
well, I mean, the one thing is that a huge amount of our water, you know, that we heat up in our homes, like let's see, home water heating tends to be about a third of our household like budget, like energy budget, and we throw all of it away, you know, right down the tubes as soon as we're done taking our shower or washing dishes or doing laundry, and all about 90% of that can get recovered. And so it's sort of like the last kind of I don't know, it's like the last thing that we can do that would really change